rain fell in thin silver lines under the streetlights, and for a moment the whole street looked frozen in time. 3 bodyguards lay on the wet ground, not wounded, not struggling, just still, in the way that only death makes a body still. Their guns were still holstered. They never even got the chance to draw them. Elena Voss pressed her back against the crushed metal of the car door, her breath coming in short, broken gasps. Her expensive coat was torn at the shoulder. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had hired 3 of the best guards money could buy, and all 3 were gone before she even understood what was happening. Standing between her and the 4 men with guns was the 4th guard, the cheap one, the one she almost didn't hire. His name was Kael. He hadn't moved in 3 seconds. 3 long, terrible seconds, while rain soaked through his jacket and 4 gun barrels pointed straight at his chest. Any normal man would have raised his hands. Any normal man would have begged. Kael simply watched them. His eyes were calm, almost bored, like a man waiting for a bus that was running a little late. "On your knees," one of the attackers screamed, his voice cracking with nerves he didn't want to admit to. "Now." Kael tilted his head slightly, like he was thinking about the request. Then he smiled. It wasn't an angry smile. It wasn't even a confident one. It was small and tired and strangely sad. The smile of a man who had heard those exact words 100 times before, on 100 different worlds, from men who were about to make a terrible mistake. "You should lower those," he said quietly. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "For your own sake." The lead attacker laughed, nervous and sharp. "Lower them? There's 4 of us and 1 of you." He never finished the sentence. What happened next took 9 seconds. Elena would spend the rest of her life trying to describe those 9 seconds, and she would never find the right words. It wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic music, no slow motion. It was fast, impossibly, unnaturally fast, and it was quiet. Kael didn't shout. He didn't roar with rage. He moved like water finding the fastest path downhill, like his body already knew exactly where every attacker would be a half second before they moved there themselves. The first gun clattered to the ground before its owner even understood his wrist was broken. The second man swung a knife and hit nothing but empty rain. The third tried to run and didn't get 2 steps. By the time the 4th attacker realized what was happening, Kael was already standing in front of him, close enough to touch, calm as still water. The man's gun trembled in his hand. "Please," he whispered. Kael looked at him for a long moment. Something flickered behind his calm eyes, not anger, not hate. Something closer to grief, like this small, frightened man reminded him of something far away, something he had lost, a long time ago. "I'm not going to kill you," Kael said softly. "You get to walk away tonight." Not everyone where I'm from was that lucky. The man dropped his gun and ran into the rain, disappearing between the buildings, and he never spoke of that night again to anyone who would believe him. Silence returned to the street. Just rain, and 3 bodies, and Elena, still frozen against the wrecked car, staring at the man she had hired because he was the cheapest option on the list. Kael turned to her. For the first time, his calm cracked slightly, and something almost like worry crossed his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her, his voice suddenly gentle, almost careful, like he was speaking to something fragile and precious. Elena opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she found herself staring at his hands. Steady. Not a single tremble. A man who had just ended 3 lives in 9 seconds, and his hands were as calm as if he'd simply finished a cup of tea. "What are you?" she finally whispered. Kael's eyes softened, but there was something ancient and heavy behind them, something that didn't belong on Earth, or in this city, or in this quiet, comfortable world where people worried about traffic and deadlines and forgot that somewhere out there, other worlds existed that didn't forgive weakness. He helped her to her feet gently, like she was made of glass. "Later," he said quietly. "Right now, we need to move." But Elena couldn't stop staring at him, at the calm, tired sadness in his eyes, and a single terrifying thought settled into her mind, one she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried. Whatever. He is, she thought. It isn't from here. And somewhere, far behind those calm eyes, something ancient and unbearably patient looked back at her, like a man who had spent his entire life surviving a world that never once showed him mercy. 3 days passed, and Elena began to notice the small things. At first she told herself she was imagining them. Grief and fear could do strange things to a person's mind. But the small things kept adding up, one after another, like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to finish. Kael never slept more than 2 hours a night. She knew this because she barely slept herself now. And every time she woke in the dark hours before dawn, she found him sitting by the window, perfectly still, eyes open, watching the street below like he was waiting for something to happen. He ate like a man who hadn't eaten in days, even right after a full meal. Once she watched him finish an entire plate of food in under a minute, then look almost embarrassed, like he'd forgotten how strange that looked to someone who had never gone hungry. And then there was the night a car backfired outside her apartment. Every guard in the building flinched. 2 of them actually ducked behind furniture, hands going for their weapons. Kael didn't move at all. He didn't even glance toward the window. He simply kept reading the small paperback book in his hands as if the loud bang wasn't worth the effort of turning his head. "Doesn't that bother you?" Elena had asked, her heart still pounding. Kael had looked up, confused for a moment, like he genuinely didn't understand the question. Then something like realization crossed his face. Had almost forgotten how ordinary a small sound like that must seem to her. "That's not a sound worth reacting to," he said simply, and returned to his book. Elena hadn't been able to shake that sentence for days. Tonight, they were walking through an underground parking garage heading to a car that would take her to a meeting she couldn't avoid. The garage was dim, lit by flickering yellow lights, and every shadow between the concrete pillars felt a little too deep, a little too quiet. Kael walked slightly ahead of her, calm as always. But Elena noticed something new. His eyes moved constantly, tracking every corner, every shadow, every sound, like his senses were built for a much darker world than this parking garage. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, stopping mid-step. Elena froze. "What?" "I don't hear anything. That's the problem," Kael murmured. "It's too quiet." Before she could ask what he meant, 5 men stepped out from behind the parked cars, spreading into a loose half-circle. Guns raised, faces hidden beneath dark hoods. Professional, coordinated, not like the desperate attackers from before. These men moved like soldiers. Elena's blood turned to ice. Kael, for the first time since she'd met him, let out a slow breath, almost like a sigh of mild irritation, the way a man might sigh at heavy traffic on his way to work. "Stay behind me," he said calmly, "and don't watch this part." She didn't listen. What followed was the fastest, most brutal 11 seconds Elena had ever witnessed. Kael moved like the air itself bent around him, closing distance before the first man could even fire a shot. Bones cracked, bodies dropped. One man managed to get a single shot off, the bullet tearing through Kael's shoulder. And he didn't even flinch. He simply turned, grabbed the man's wrist, and ended the fight in half a second, like the bullet wound was a mosquito bite, not a wound that would have sent any normal man to the hospital. Within moments, all 5 attackers were on the ground, disarmed, groaning, defeated. Kael stood in the center of them, breathing steady, blood soaking through his jacket from the bullet wound, completely unbothered by the pain that should have dropped him to his knees. Elena stared at him, shaking, horrified and amazed all at once. "You're bleeding," she whispered. Kael glanced down at his shoulder like he'd only just remembered it was there. "It's shallow," he said simply. "I've had worse." "Worse than a bullet?" Elena's voice cracked with disbelief. Kael turned to face her fully, and for the first time, something behind his calm eyes shifted, something old and heavy and unbearably tired. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need you to understand something about me. Where I come from, a wound like this isn't something you stop moving for. If you stop moving, you don't get back up. Elena's mind raced, trying to make sense of the words, trying to understand what kind of place could make a bullet wound feel like nothing. "Where do you come from?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "What kind of place did that to you?" Kael's expression darkened, and for just a moment, the calm mask slipped, revealing something raw underneath, something that looked almost like old grief wrapped around old fear. He opened his mouth to answer, and then, from the shadows behind the fallen attackers, a new voice spoke, calm and cold, carrying easily across the empty garage. "Careful, Kael," the voice said. "You wouldn't want her to find out what you really are before we're ready to use that against you." The voice echoed across the parking garage, calm and unbothered by the 5 bodies on the ground. Kael went still. Not the relaxed stillness Elena had seen before, but something colder, sharper. The stillness of a man recognizing a threat he hadn't expected to face tonight. A figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. An older man, silver-haired, wearing a suit far too expensive for a parking garage full of unconscious mercenaries. He walked without fear, hands calmly folded behind his back, like he owned every shadow in the room. "Hello, Kael," the man said, smiling faintly. "It's been a long time. You know him?" Elena whispered, backing closer to Kael's side. Kael didn't answer her. His eyes stayed locked on the stranger, his jaw tight. "Draven," he said quietly, like the name itself tasted bitter. "I thought you were dead, and I thought you were still on the grave," Draven replied smoothly, "dying with the rest of them, like you were supposed to." Elena's stomach dropped. The grave. She had never heard that word before, but the way Kael's whole body tensed at the sound of it told her everything. She needed to know, whatever it meant. It was the key to every strange, impossible thing she'd witnessed over the last few days. "You're the one who sent them," Kael said, nodding toward the men groaning on the ground. "Just to talk to me?" "I sent them to test something," Draven said, his smile never wavering. "And you just confirmed it beautifully. 5 trained men, down in under 15 seconds. Bullet wound barely slowing you down. Exactly like the old report said." Elena's mind spun. "Reports? What reports? Someone's been studying him?" Draven's eyes shifted to her, almost amused. "Sweetheart, your bodyguard isn't just a man. He's a resource. A very valuable, very rare resource that certain people have been searching for a long, long time." Kael stepped slightly in front of Elena, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. "Leave her out of this, Draven. This is between us." "Oh, but it isn't," Draven said almost gently. "She's the reason you're standing in this garage tonight, which means she's already part of this, whether you like it or not." Elena's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She stared at Kael, desperate for some kind of explanation. "Kael, please, tell me what's happening. What is the grave?" Kael's shoulders sagged slightly, like a weight he'd been carrying quietly for years had finally grown too heavy to hide. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and tired and full of an old, deep pain. "It's not a place with a real name," he said slowly. "The first colonists just called it that, because nothing that landed there ever really left. Triple Earth's gravity, storms that could rip a building apart in minutes, creatures the size of houses that hunted in packs. Humanity sent settlers, there by mistake decades ago. Then we lost contact and everyone assumed the colony died in the first year." "But it didn't die," Elena whispered, already understanding, already dreading the answer. "No," Kael said softly. "It adapted. The children, born there, grew up faster, stronger, harder. We didn't have a choice. Either you learned to survive by 6 years old or you didn't survive at all." Draven watched this confession with quiet satisfaction, like a man enjoying a show he had already seen the ending of. "Tell her the best part, Kael," Draven said. "Tell her how many children were on that colony when it was abandoned." Kael's jaw clenched. Elena saw something break behind his eyes, something raw and grieving. "Thousands," Kael said quietly. "Thousands of families were sent there, told it was paradise. A new Earth. And how many are left now? Draven pressed, his voice almost gentle, almost cruel in its softness. Kael didn't answer right away. When, he finally spoke. His voice cracked slightly, just once before the calm returned. I don't know exactly, he said. But I'm the only one who ever made it off that planet alive. Silence fell across the garage. Elena felt tears building in her eyes, horrified by the weight of what he'd just said, by the childhood he must have survived, by the losses he clearly still carried every single day. Draven, however, simply smiled wider, like this was the exact moment he had been waiting for. Not quite the only one, he said calmly. Which brings me to why I'm really here tonight. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph, holding it up under the flickering garage lights. Kael's entire body went rigid, the color draining from his face. It was a photo of a young woman standing in front of a rusted, broken colony gate, very much alive. Say hello to your sister, Kael, Draven said softly. She's been asking about you.
Kael stared at the photograph like it might vanish if he blinked. That's not possible, he whispered. She died. They told me everyone died. They told you a lot of things, Draven said, tucking the photo back into his jacket. Most of them lies. Your sister has been alive for years, working for people who understand exactly what a Deathworlder's blood is worth. Elena's mind raced, trying to keep up. Worth? Worth to who? Draven smiled at her like she'd finally asked the right question. Miss Voss, your family stumbled onto something they shouldn't have. Records proving the grave colony wasn't lost by accident. It was abandoned deliberately, buried, along with everyone on it, to hide a resource discovery too valuable and too dangerous to ever share with the public. Elena's blood ran cold. Her father's warnings, the men hunting her. It was never about money. It was about silence. You're the ones who left them there, Kael said, voice shaking with a fury Elena had never heard from him before. You knew children were dying, and you did nothing. We did something, Draven corrected calmly. We studied, and what we learned built industries you can't even imagine, Kael. Your suffering wasn't wasted. It was useful. Kael took a step forward, every muscle coiled, and for the first time, Elena saw something in his eyes that frightened her more than any attacker had. Pure, controlled rage, the kind that came from years of grief finally finding a target. Draven didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand, unbothered. Careful. Your sister's safety depends entirely on your next decision. The words landed like a blow. Kael's rage cracked, just slightly, replaced by something far more painful. Helplessness. What do you want? Kael said quietly. It wasn't a question anymore. Protect the girl, Draven said, nodding toward Elena. Hand her over quietly. Walk away, and your sister stays safe on the grave, comfortable, alive. Fight us, protect her, and I promise you, Kael, you'll never see your sister again. Elena's chest tightened. She looked at Kael, horrified at the impossible choice being placed in front of him because of her. Don't, she whispered. Don't you dare choose me over your own sister. Kael didn't answer her. His eyes stayed locked on Draven, unreadable, unmoving. Draven checked his watch, almost bored. You have until midnight to decide. He turned, walking calmly back into the shadows between the pillars. Choose carefully, Kael. Some debts follow you across worlds. The garage fell silent, except for the quiet, frantic beat of Elena's heart. Kael's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out slowly, hands trembling for the first time since Elena had known him. A single new photo appeared on the screen, his sister, tied to a chair, terrified, staring directly into the camera. Beneath it, a message. TikTok, brother, choose. Kael stared at the photo of his sister until the screen dimmed on its own. His hand, steady through gunfire and blood, now shook like a man holding something far heavier than a phone. Elena watched him, her own fear forgotten for a moment. Kael, go. Save her. I mean it. You don't understand what you're asking me to walk away from, Kael said quietly. I understand you have a sister who's been alone for years, Elena said, her voice breaking. I won't be the reason you lose her twice. Kael closed his eyes. For a long moment, the garage was silent except for the distant drip of water from a broken pipe. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed. The grief was still there, but underneath it, something older had woken up. Steady, immovable, like bedrock. There was a law in the grave, he said slowly. Only one law that mattered, above hunger, above fear, above everything. You never abandon someone weaker than you. Not ever, because tomorrow you might be the weak one and you'll need someone who remembers the law. Kael, I broke that law once, he said, cutting her off gently. I was 9 years old. I ran from a fight I could have helped with because I was scared and someone died because of it. I promised myself I would never run again. Elena's eyes filled with tears. This isn't the same. This is your sister. I know, Kael said, and for the first time his voice cracked completely. And I am going to get her back, but not like this. Not by handing you to men who buried an entire world to protect a secret. He turned, walking toward the garage exit, phone still gripped tightly in his hand. Where are you going? Elena called after him. To break a rule Draven doesn't know I still remember, Kael said. He scrolled through an old contact list, names Elena didn't recognize, until he found one buried near the bottom. Untouched for years. His thumb hovered over it, trembling slightly. Then he pressed call. The line rang twice. Elena held her breath. A rough, static-filled voice answered, thick with disbelief. Kael, is that actually you? We thought the grave took you like it took everyone else. It almost did, Kael said quietly, his eyes hardening with each word. I need you, all of you. Whoever's left. A long pause crackled on the line. You know what you're asking, the voice said carefully. None of us go back to that life easily. I know, Kael said. But they took my sister, and they're using her to get to someone innocent.
Another pause, longer this time. Then, low and certain, the voice replied, Then tell us who we're killing. Kael closed his eyes, steadying himself against the cold concrete wall. It's not one person, he said. It's the people who buried the grave. The voice on the other end went silent for a moment. Then it simply said, Send us the address. They came at midnight, exactly as Draven had asked. But Kael wasn't alone. 3 figures stepped out of the shadows beside him as they approached the old warehouse where Draven's men were holding his sister. Quiet, scarred, calm in a way that made even Elena's skin prickle. She recognized the look immediately now, the same stillness Kael carried, the same eyes that had seen too much to be afraid of anything this world could offer. Survivors of the grave, Kael said simply, by way of introduction. The ones who made it. Elena counted 3 of them, 3, standing beside the man she'd once thought was just cheap security. 4 people, against an army. It didn't feel like enough. It was more than enough. The mercenaries guarding the warehouse never stood a chance. Kael and the others moved through the building like they'd rehearsed this exact fight 1,000 times, though Elena knew they hadn't. It wasn't training. It was instinct, carved deep into their bones by a planet that offered no second chances. Gunfire, shouting, bodies falling. And through it all, the 4 of them barely raised their voices above a whisper. Kael found his sister in a back room, tied to a chair, exactly like the photo. She looked up at him, eyes wide with disbelief, tears spilling before he'd even crossed the room. You came, she whispered. I told you I would, Kael said, cutting her free, holding her like she might disappear if he let go too soon. But the fight wasn't over. Draven waited in the final room, alone, unafraid, exactly as calm as the night in the parking garage. Impressive, Draven said, almost admiring. 4 Deathworlders in one place. My employers will be very interested to hear about this. There won't be a next report, Kael said quietly, stepping forward. Draven smiled, reaching slowly into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a small device. Careful. Everything on this drive gets erased the moment I die. Every record of the grave, every name, every child who was ever there. Kael stopped, understanding the threat immediately. Kill me, Draven continued calmly, and the whole world forgets your people ever existed. Let me walk away, And maybe, someday, the truth comes out on my terms. Elena stepped forward before Kael could answer. There's a third option. She held up her phone. The camera light was already blinking red. I've been recording since the moment we walked in, she said. Every word. It's already uploading. Draven's calm expression finally cracked. Kael looked at Elena, something like awe breaking through his exhaustion, and then turned back to Draven, voice low and final. The world doesn't need your drive, Kael said. It just needed the truth. Sirens began wailing somewhere outside, growing closer, and Draven's face went pale as the device slipped from his trembling hand. Kael turned to his sister, to Elena, to the 3 survivors standing quietly behind him. It's not over, he said softly. This was just the first world that's going to learn what we are.